the former member for North East Hampshire, and also Mike Wood, the former member for Batley and Spen, both of whom I worked with for over 2 years in a working party in search of a fair settlement of this matter. Unfortunately, Madam Deputy Speaker, throughout the process, we all lost faith and trust in the Post Office's willingness to investigate this issue properly and thoroughly. To give some background to how the Post Office have let down both the sub-postmasters and indeed members of this House throughout this process, let us consider how they have dealt with this matter from the very outset. The Horizon accounting system used by sub-postmasters was introduced some 15 years ago. Almost immediately, a spate of discrepancies began to appear as sub-postmasters attempted to balance their accounts at the end of the day. From that period forward, there have been failing after failing on the part of the Post Office. The Post Office has finally acknowledged that its health system for the Horizon software system was completely inadequate. However, even with that admission, the Post Office continues in its failure to demonstrate any appetite to deal with issues arising from the Horizon system in a fair and transparent way. I will give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Is there not something disgraceful with the criminal charges that were put against these postmasters and postmistresses, and the fault lay with the Post Office, and yet now 2 years after the investigations, the criminal charges haven't been lifted, and the shadow hanging over their heads has not been lifted either? Does it not feel it's time to bring it to an end?
The Honourable Gentleman tells a tale which has been told too long to the working group. This has gone on far too long. We need to bring it to a head, and I hope that this debate tonight will give us an opportunity to do so. The mediation scheme, which was set up to handle disputes with the software system, has not delivered what members of this House understood was agreed at its inception. It was flawed in a number of ways, the most significant being that it excluded those who had pleaded guilty, often in fear. I'll give way on that point.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. My constituent, Jo Hamilton, actually has her case in front of the CCRC. Would my honourable friend agree that for those people who have pleaded guilty, that the CCRC should be given powers to obtain all the papers that they need from private sector organisations, and indeed full access to all Post Office files?
My honourable friend makes a good point, and he's absolutely right, because many of the people, they pleaded guilty on advice from lawyers. They pleaded guilty out of fear of losing their liberty, potentially, in a lengthy and expensive court battle with the Post Office, with ultimate resources. And the House should know that the Horizon system has no adequate suspense account function. So it pushes the sub-postmaster who wants to balance his books when actually the books do not balance. This is false accounting, and indeed is a criminal offence. However, I have seen correspondence, Madam Deputy Speaker, which shows that the Post Office has advised sub-postmasters to keep any surplus balances they discover at the close of business in their safe, so that they can put them back when they have a shortage. Madam Deputy Speaker, this is also false accounting and is also a criminal offence. A further flaw has been the fact that issues of concern to the forensic accountants, Second Sight, appointed by the Post Office at the request of the working group to independently assess the mediation cases, the issues the forensic accounts have raised have been specifically excluded from mediation. For example, the absence or the ignorance by the sub-postmaster of the contract they were under, the failure of the audits and the investigations. And this is despite the Post Office Limited's agreement with members of Parliament, members of this House, that the scheme would cover all of these issues. This is resulting in what I believe to be 90% of the cases in dispute being excluded from the mediation scheme. This mediation has proven to be a shadow of what was agreed with members of this House. I first became involved in this matter several years ago when my constituent Michael Rudkin brought a case to me. My constituent had 15 years' experience as a postmaster and served as a senior member of the National Executive. Indeed, he was chairman of the negotiating committee, the most senior post within the Federation, the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, responsible for national negotiations with Post Office Limited and Royal Mail Group. In short, my constituent knew his job and he knew this organisation inside out. He knew this organisation to the extent that on a visit to the post office headquarters at Bracknell, he was shown in error a room where operatives had remote access to the Horizon software, and it was demonstrated to him how postmasters' accounts could be altered remotely. The House should know that the Post Office has always maintained that it is not possible to alter accounts in a sub-post office remotely. However, recently they have admitted that this was not the truth. In a debate on this issue in December, I went into the details of Mr Rudkin's case. However, to briefly summarise, his post office branch had a loss in the accounts in excess of £44,000. He was absolved of any knowledge of this loss by Post Office Limited, but ordered to pay back the monies at £1,000 per month from his salary. Having paid £13,000 back, Post Office Limited then started proceedings against Mr Rudkin's wife for theft and false accounting. They also applied for a confiscation order placed on all his property and had his bank accounts frozen using the Proceeds of Crime Act. This all occurred after my constituent had witnessed the operatives in Post Office headquarters demonstrating their remote access to the Horizon system. My constituent has gone through the mediation scheme, and his experience is that the professional advisors, Ava Limited, Bill Cleghorn and Eben Port, are very good. Second Sight have been extremely fair, professional and accurate in analysis of both systemic and thematic issues within Post Office Limited. However, the same cannot be said of the Post Office themselves. I and my constituent have no faith in the Post Office to resolve this matter. It is said that justice delayed is justice denied, and this matter simply dragged on for far too long, as the Post Office seemingly look ever more for reasons for delaying the truth of this matter coming out.
Will you give way?
I'll give way on that point.
I'm grateful. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. In the last 5 days, I've been alerted to a case in my North Devon constituency, and very briefly, the sub-postmistress has emailed me to say my post office has been audited today and has been closed due to financial discrepancies as a result, I believe, of the inadequacies of the Horizon system. This has closed the post office, it's left that village without a post office service, and it's also obviously putting intolerable strain on my constituent. And I'd be grateful if my honourable friend would think of that and the Minister to consider the impact that this is having.
My honourable friend is quite right, and I'll jump forward a little bit. When you've got a spokesperson for the post office stating, and I quote, "I am really sorry if people have faced lifestyle problems as a result of their having worked in a post office branch." You have to wonder, Madam Deputy Speaker, if this organisation, the Post Office, is even aware of the misery it has caused. The fact that the Post Office Limited believes that honest, decent, hard-working people who've been losing their homes, their businesses, their savings, their reputation, and worst of all, in some cases, their liberty, can be quantified as a lifestyle change. It only serves to show to me that this organisation is not fit to conduct an inquiry into this matter. The Post Office mediation scheme has proved to be a sham. Second Sight have proven to be far too independent for the Post Office to stand, and the disdain that has been shown to members of this House and their own sub-postmasters is actually a disgrace. And when you look, I'll give way once more.
Thank you. Thank you. Does my honourable friend agree with my constituents, Mr. and Mrs. Hedges, as sub-postmasters, that the Post Office in this case has treated not only them but also this House with contempt?
As indeed, and I think when you look across the cross-section of members who have raised this as an important matter, many of whom have served at the highest level in government, and all who believe that their constituents have been wronged, how can the Post Office believe it continue to sweep this matter under the carpet, Madam Deputy Speaker? It's most interesting that after 2 years, when the Post Office has consistently claimed that their Horizon system software is robust and 100% reliable, I have now an email in my possession which clearly shows that the Post Office are now urgently seeking a replacement software system from IBM. I'm sure that the Minister can draw his own conclusion from this happy coincidence that the investigation is now closed, and it would appear to me that it's now sunset for the Horizon system indeed. There is, therefore, my belief, and the view of many members across this House, that this matter must now be taken away from the Post Office and a judicial inquiry must be called. The Post Office has abused its privileged position and sought to cover up its failings by way of a wholly non-transparent approach to the mediation process. I will give way once more.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clearly, concerns about the Horizon system are long-standing. In the few weeks that I've been here, I've had at least 3 constituents that have had long-standing concerns over the Horizon system, and there are huge problems that have been historic. I understand from one of my constituents that an injunction has been taken out against her for the sale of a property.
That intervention's slightly too long, so Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm not surprised. The management style, in my view, of the senior executive of the Post Office is Dickensian, and they have an almost feudal relationship with their sub-postmasters. This is now a national scandal, and as the Post Office has demonstrated, it is incapable of putting its own house in order. It falls to this House and this government to do it for it. I therefore respectfully ask the Minister for a full judicial review into the Post Office Horizon system and the way in which the Post Office contracts with its sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses.
Kevin Jones.
Can I congratulate the Honourable Member for North West Leicestershire for securing this debate. My constituent Tom Brown, a postmaster for 30 years at a post office in Newcastle. In 2008, Madam Deputy Speaker, he informed the post office there was a problem with his Horizon system. They actually took away one of his base units to change it. He was told by the helpline, a euphemism I've got to say because it's not been very helpful at all to many postmasters and masters, and actually got them into more trouble, that the system would rectify itself. It didn't. At the next audit, it said that he was down £85,000. He was arrested by Northumbria Police, his car and home was searched, and subsequent to that, the police dropped all charges. There was no evidence against him. Then, for some unknown reason, the Post Office took a prosecution against him to take him to court for false accounting. That took until July 2013, when he finally appeared in court for, I think, 3rd time, when no evidence was put forward by the court. After this point, the case was dropped. This is a man that's lost his home, his livelihood and his good reputation. He is actually one of those individuals that have gone through the mediation system, even though, as the Honourable Member just outlined, the mediation system is a sham. He had 4 different dates that were all delayed, and he described it to me as 6 hours of wasted time. The Post Office employed top lawyers from Newcastle to represent themselves. They went through what they said was the evidence again and have made no offer at all. The system is a sham, and as the member for North West Leicestershire has outlined, this has been a way of just delaying decisions on these cases. Briefly.
Thank you for giving way. Does the Honourable Member agree that the Post Office has failed to be transparent throughout this process? My constituent, Miss Carter, sub-postmistress, actually asked the Post Office to audit her branch to get to the bottom of the problem, but they refused to do so.
I'll go further than that. They haven't been transparent. They've actually gone out their way to delay cases, hide evidence, and I've got to say the concern I have in terms of the work the Second Sight have done is if that information returned back to the Post Office, evidence will go missing. That's why I agree totally with the Honourable Member for North West Leicestershire that there needs to be an independent judicial inquiry into this. As he described it, it's a national scandal. I'm very pleased that the Honourable friend, the member for Hartlepool, the new chair of the Biz Select Committee, is present in this debate tonight, and I would urge him, certainly his committee, to look at this as a matter of urgency. There's a fundamental point here, Madam Speaker. Who actually controls the Post Office? This is an organisation which is out of control. It has led to people's lives being ruined. There's already been said, in some cases, people being given prison sentences when clearly they're innocent. It is important that we actually get to the bottom of this, and without that judicial inquiry, I fear that this national scandal and these people's reputations will continue to be blackened.
Minister George Freeman.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by congratulating my honourable friend, Member for North West Leicestershire, on securing this debate, and to commend him and other members, honourable members across the House, both tonight and elsewhere, for raising the concerns of their individual constituents, sub-postmasters who face problems. And I echo the tributes paid to the former member for North East Hampshire and Batley Wood for their work on this issue. They and he and others can take a great deal of credit for raising this issue and encouraging the Post Office to take action to address the concerns of individual sub-postmasters and to improve their business for the thousands of sub-postmasters and staff working in the network today. My honourable friend kindly informed me before the debate of the points he wanted to raise, and I will try to deal with all his questions. But I wanted first just to set out a little background for the House on this issue. Madam Deputy Speaker, honourable members don't need me to wax lyrical about the important role that post offices play in our communities, providing access to essential mail, financial and government services. I'm sure all of us agree and understand that, and that the Post Office is undergoing a very significant transformation programme to remove central costs, grow new revenue streams and modernise its extensive branch network. Already more than half of eligible sub-postmasters have benefited from investment in their branches or have signed up to do so. These changes will help the Post Office network survive in the digital age. The way we live and communicate is changing, and Post Offices need obviously to adapt to that, and the government is supporting and investing in Post Office to ensure it can become sustainable for the long term and to reduce its reliance on taxpayer subsidy. The network is now at its most stable for a generation. Having halted the closure programmes we saw under previous governments, we're committed to securing the future of 3,000 branches, which are the last shop in local communities. The government is, of course, the shareholder of Post Office Limited, and in that role we make sure that there's a wide network of branches across the whole of the country, and we provide subsidy for Post Office to do so. But we also recognise that it is a commercial business, and we allow it to operate as such. Furthermore, as I'm sure most honourable members are aware, the vast majority of Post Office branches are operated not by Post Office Limited but by sub-postmasters. They're independent business people who choose to contract with Post Office Limited to provide post office services, usually from a small business or such as a shop. They are, of course, in so many communities, the lifeblood of the local economy, and Post Office Limited needs to ensure that they support their sub-postmasters properly. I'm pleased that Post Office take that role very seriously, and that they've made significant improvements to the way they work with their sub-postmasters, not least following many of the cases that honourable members have raised. Post Office Limited already ensure that new sub-postmasters receive full training on all aspects of their role, including on the Horizon system, including classroom training and training in branch. There's also a dedicated helpline available to sub-postmasters to help resolve any issues that they're having. I will give way briefly.
I'm listening carefully to what the Minister is saying, but he must surely accept that there's a fundamental problem with this Horizon system, because the complaints we have are right across the country from all sections of the population, as well as the sub-postmasters themselves.
I was and will come to the point about the quality of the system. I think it's difficult on the face of it to characterise either the training or the helpline as having been inadequate, Madam Deputy Speaker. The vast majority of people who use or have used the Horizon system since it was introduced 15 years ago have done so, in fact, successfully. But there's, of course, room for improvement, and the Post Office has implemented a business support programme to this end, including improvements to training, both classroom and new online training available 24/7, improvements to Post Office's support helpline, including new ways of identifying and proactively supporting branches in difficulty, and new processes to help sub-postmasters manage their branch and protect against fraud. I want to come now to some of the points that have been made about the Horizon IT system. It's used by tens of thousands of people working in the Post Office network. It's performing over 6 million transactions every working day in branches up and down the country. So it is absolutely essential that it functions correctly. And like any large IT system, it's subject to rigorous testing, independent audit, and industry accreditation. Nevertheless, in the light of the concerns raised that there were serious glitches in the Horizon system, Post Office commissioned an independent firm of forensic accountants, Second Sight, to investigate. Second Sight produced 2 independent reports, one in 2013 and one earlier this year, both of which found there was no evidence of systemic flaws in the system. That is an important point which I'd like to reiterate. There is no evidence of systemic flaws, to the Shadow Minister's point, in the system. Second Sight's reports have rightly pointed out some areas where Post Office could have improved the way it operates, particularly around the level of training and the support it had provided in some individual cases. And as I said earlier, Post Office are acting on those points. I would just highlight the recent comments of the General Secretary of the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, George Thompson, who told the Biz Select Committee in the last Parliament that we, the NFSP, represent 7,000 sub-postmasters. If there was a systemic problem, we would be absolutely inundated, he said. He went on to say, over the 15 years, the Horizon system has been fantastically robust. Madam Deputy Speaker, as well as improvements, I just may finish this point, to training and support, the Post Office also launched a mediation scheme so that any current or former sub-postmaster who felt they had problems with the Horizon system could bring forward an application. They would have their cases thoroughly re-investigated by both Post Office and by Second Sight, and if appropriate, proceed to mediation to seek to resolve any issues. It's important to understand this mediation scheme is independent of government, and that is the right approach for something which is a contractual matter between two independent businesses. And we should remember that sub-postmasters are independent business people who have contracts with Post Office Limited. Mediation is, of course, a voluntary process. Both parties need to consent to it. I will just in a minute. And for it to be successful, there needs to be a reasonable chance of coming to a common understanding. Sometimes mediation will not be appropriate or will not succeed, but it is important to note that mediation cannot overturn a criminal conviction, and I'll come back to that point. My honourable friend has been critical of the mediation scheme and the way that it's progressing, as others are and have been. He mentioned that 90% of cases have been excluded from mediation. I have to say that statistic is not borne out by the information provided by the Centre for Effective Dispute Resolution, CEDA, who oversee the mediation scheme and are independent. I give way to the left.
Given the number of postmasters and postmistresses who obviously have been attending MP surgeries to discuss this matter, would the Minister not agree that one miscarriage of justice is one too many and that the Post Office has to be accountable for the system?
I absolutely accept that the Post Office must be accountable for any miscarriages, and I'll come back in a minute, if I may, at the end to a suggestion I'd like to make about how we might take this forward. My honourable friend has raised the case of his constituent, Mr Rudkin. Now, I can't comment on that individual case, as he'll understand, or any others, because those details are rightly confidential, but I would like to reiterate an offer that's been made to all honourable members who have a constituent in the scheme. Post Office Limited have offered to meet and discuss individual cases in detail, provided the applicant gives their consent to this, and I'm aware that Post Office have repeated this offer to my honourable friend in the last fortnight, and I hope he and others will take them up on that. I would be delighted to convene that meeting in my office in the department if that helps. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to move on to the points that my honourable friend has raised about whether there may have been miscarriages of justice where sub-postmasters have been prosecuted and convicted. Post Office handles large amounts of public money every day and operates a trusted role in communities. So it's vital that they have processes in place to protect this and guard against fraud or theft. Post Office can bring prosecutions against an individual, but it's down to the courts to determine whether or not that individual is guilty. If an individual has been convicted and feels that their conviction is unsafe, then they should explore the legal avenues open to them. They should seek advice on whether they can appeal their conviction or raise their case with the Criminal Cases Review Commission. That is the correct way to deal with these issues if people believe that there have been miscarriages of justice. The House cannot overturn a court ruling, nor indeed can mediation. Yes, I'll give way.
Isn't it right to note that of course it is for individuals to decide whether they're going to plead guilty, of course there is an avenue of appeal, but the fact is for many of these people the time for appealing will have been long past, and so that they remain the victims of a grave injustice.
Well, as I say, if any individuals feel that their conviction is unsafe, they can always explore legal avenues open to them, and where there are, as is alleged, large numbers who feel that's the case, it's perfectly possible for them to bring a class action together. So I don't accept the case that there is a fundamental injustice in the process that prevents people from bringing those claims, but I do accept that it is absolutely vital that where there is a legitimate claim against Post Office that it has treated its sub-postmasters unfairly, those claims absolutely should be looked at properly. Madam Speaker, in the limited time available, I just wanted to move on to the Post Office's approach here. My honourable friend and others have, both tonight and elsewhere, raised very serious matters of dissatisfaction with the way that Post Office has handled its relations with its sub-postmasters. When this debate was called, I personally spoke to the Post Office to understand the situation and have received a letter from their Chief Executive, Paula Venables, which I shall send to my honourable friend and those others who've spoken tonight and place in the libraries of the House. The letter sets out how seriously they've taken this matter, and as Ms Venables says, we have gone to great lengths because I was determined that if there were problems with the Horizon system, these had to be identified and resolved, but I will happily pick up any issues that my honourable friend or others feel the letter doesn't address. As I've already said, the mediation scheme is independent, rightly, of government, and the mediation scheme was established jointly by Post Office and the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance, working with Second Sight and overseen by an independent chair, a former Court of Appeal judge. It is right that the details of individual cases should be confidential, and it's right that Post Office are respecting that. It also remains the case that there's no evidence. I'll give away briefly on that point.
Thanks to the Minister for giving way, but he should be aware that one of the criteria the Post Office gave for removing cases from mediation would be where there was a very large claim. Therefore, those sub-postmasters who suffered the greatest loss, the greatest injustice, were immediately excluded from the mediation system.
That is a very interesting point, which I would happily take up with my honourable friend, and perhaps in the context of what I'm about to suggest, which is that whilst it remains the case that there's no evidence that the Horizon system is flawed, if any individual feels that their conviction is unsafe, they can pursue the legal avenues available to them. And I don't see any reason for the government to intervene in this matter by instigating a full judicial inquiry. But I am very struck by the extent of the concern of members expressed across the House tonight and during the course of the lead up to this debate, and some of the specific testimony that's been heard tonight. And I would be very happy to convene a meeting in the department, perhaps led by my honourable friend with the support of others across the House, to deal with the point that he's just made and one or two others that have been made this evening, and to bring Post Office, invite Post Office to come to that meeting with representatives of the sub-postmasters to try and iron out those issues. Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend has raised other points which are a matter for Post Office rather than the government. I have no doubt that Post Office Limited have been listening closely to this debate and will be in touch to answer his questions. I agree with my honourable friend that this matter has gone on far longer than anyone would wish, and has been, for whatever reason, the cause of a huge amount of difficulty and trial and unnecessary hardship for a number of sub-postmasters who've been affected. The important thing now is for the final cases in the mediation scheme to progress to mediation, and I'd urge all parties involved to continue to work together to make that happen. This will help the individuals with cases remaining in the scheme reach resolution, and it'll mean the Post Office can, working closely and collaboratively with its sub-postmasters, carry on with its essential role of serving communities. But I repeat again that I think some of the points that have been made tonight in the House do merit investigation. I would happily convene that meeting in the department to put those specific points to Post Office Limited, and to reiterate to them tonight that it is absolutely vital that whilst it may be the case that this system generally has worked well for the vast majority of users, that is in itself not a reason to ensure that those who have legitimately not been able to deal with the system should not be penalised unfairly, and certainly should not be made the victim of criminal judgments when their crime is nothing more than being unable to cope with a new IT system. And I look forward to raising those points with Post Office in a subsequent meeting.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The ayes have it.